osteoporosis. So osteoporosis is like extremely serious. It means your bones are very brittle. And osteopenia is like the midpoint between osteoporosis and having normal bone density. So if I were to bump into a table and break my ribs, that would be pretty serious, and it's most likely osteoporosis. So yeah, that's the review for skeletal practice test.
Yep, the guided note sheet for today is in the classroom, so you might have to scroll down a little bit because it's like the third or fourth post down. All right, so if everybody has the handout pulled up, I'm going to get started. Is everybody good to go? All right, cool. So today we are starting the first day of 3 on the muscular system. Why does Daphne not have any skin? That's your muscular system. See, I'm running after you because your muscles help you run. All right, so today what we're going to be going over are 4 things: muscular functions, the 3 types of muscle tissue, general muscle anatomy, and the neuromuscular junction and acetylcholine. So you guys might not know what some of these things are yet. So let's just get into it. All right, so first of all, let's talk about muscle functions, and there are a lot of them. So can you guys guess any before we get started? You can just put it in the chat.
Moving to move your body.
All right, yeah, so I see a lot of running and moving and like helping you lift things, and yeah, pumping your heart, digestion, pooping, yeah, that is true.
Wait, are we supposed to fill out the handout like as we go, or?
Yeah, as you go. So you'll get all the answers on the slides, or I'll.
Just a vitamin.
What's that?
I didn't get the guided note sheet. I don't know where it is.
Okay, are you in the Google Classroom?
Yes.
All right, so it's just attached to the post that's about today's meeting. So you might have to scroll down like to like the 3rd or 4th post, but it should be there. All right, so you guys guessed a lot of the functions, but here they all are. So you might have missed
the muscular system, day 1.
Yep, that's what it is. Yeah, thanks, Anushka. All right, so one of the main functions of muscle that you guys all got was that it's important for moving your body, obviously. So whether that's like when you're running or like holding a pencil or like chewing, those are all examples of muscles moving your body. Another important one is joint stabilization. And so what that is basically when you're standing or sitting, there's like muscles in your body that you're not consciously contracting, but they hold you upright. So like your neck and your back muscles will hold you upright, and that's an example of joint stabilization. Also posture maintenance, so that's related to the last one. Your neck and back muscles are mainly contributing to helping you stay upright. Also stabilizing body position and regulating organ volume. So I'll talk about that a little bit more. So in your body, the muscles are also important for storing and moving substances. So can anybody give me an example of muscles in your body, like moving substances around inside your body?
Peristalsis, like when you're eating,
blood circulation,
like using
contractions, the food goes down.
Yeah, so I heard digestion, blood circulation. Okay, so another few examples would be in your bladder and your stomach, there are muscles, and I'll talk about that more on the next slide, but there are muscles that will prevent the outflow of contents, and that might either be controllable or uncontrollable. Like in the example of your bladder, the muscle there is controllable. And yeah, so muscles are also responsible for this thing called peristalsis, and it's related to the last point because muscles will help you move substances within the body, and peristalsis is just the process, is like, that's how we refer to the process of the muscles contracting and moving and pushing stuff out. And finally, we have generating heat. I don't think any of you guys got that one, but 85% of your body heat is actually produced by muscle contraction. And what we call that is something called thermogenesis. And yep, so for generating heat, is that why you rub your hands together in the cold? That would be an example. We also have like shivering, which is like an involuntary contraction that happens when you're in the cold. It's just like an automatic body response to help you keep creating heat.
Teacher can answer any question. He doesn't want to go to evening help, right? फिर वही तो मसले 20 question है.
Okay,
तो आज
so
होमवर्क की
moving
बजाय
on.
उसको अटेंड करो, ओके? ब्रेक में. अच्छा अच्छा.
Yeah, could you move yourself, whoever that is? Yeah, let me.
Look at me there. Do not start the question next door. Go to the next page.
Okay, there we go. So there's things called sphincters, and that's responsible to the thing we were talking about earlier, which was, oh, go back. Okay, sure. We'll be talking about the 4 properties of muscle tissue in the next slide.
Wait, so the 4 properties of muscle tissue will be on the next slide.
Yep. So heat is generated by burning fat. But muscles are responsible for the majority of it. So like, I don't know if you guys know what like brown fat is, but there's like brown fat in your neck, and when we like metabolize that, that also helps you produce heat. But the muscles are like the heavy lifters. Pun intended. You can't hear anything? Is anyone else having issues hearing? Maybe like your Zoom is acting up, so maybe you could like try leaving the meeting and joining again, or playing with your computer settings. All right, is everybody ready to move on to the next slide?
Yes.
All right. So this is what I was talking about earlier about how like peristalsis is responsible for contracting and, you know, helping move substances around the body. So what a sphincter is basically like a ring of like a band of smooth muscle, and it contracts as one. So when it's closed, it'll prevent like the outflow of contents, like, you know, like in your like bladder and anus, but also like in your stomach. So yeah, there's like in your, so like here's an example of your stomach here. There's something called the lower esophageal sphincter. And so that is what bars the throat from the rest of your stomach. And so there's also another sphincter at the bottom of the stomach here called the pyloric sphincter. And that's what keeps the contents of your stomach from automatically going into your small intestine. Because like when you're digesting your food, you wouldn't want it to be like automatically going down to your small intestine before like the food can even get broken down. It's not part of the notes, but everything that I'm saying you could be tested on, so just pay attention and write it down if you think it's important. All right, moving on. Yeah, I'll go to the next slide, previous slide. Yeah, so sphincters, what they are like ring bands of muscle, and they're like smooth muscle, and I'll talk about what smooth muscle is later, but we can find them like at the beginning and at the end of like these organs that are responsible for storing substances. So like it's kind of like an entry door and like an exit door, if you want to think about it like that. So like in your stomach, this lower sphincter here prevents the food that's currently being digested in your stomach from going down to the small intestine, because like we want to digest it first. And so like sometimes you can control it, like in the case of like your bladder, you're able to control that muscle, but like notice how in your stomach you can't control that muscle. All right, so moving on. You guys might not, can I repeat that? Well, the recording will be uploaded to YouTube, so you can watch that after the class is over. Yep. All right, so let's move on to the properties of muscle tissue first before we go into the 3 types. So basically, let's just go through each one of these. So excitability, it's basically a property of muscle cells that they're going to be able to respond to a signal, and after they respond to a signal, they will do something. And in the case of like muscles, that's going to be like contract, obviously. I don't know if any of you guys know what like an action potential is. I wouldn't expect you to, but basically what happens is muscle cells respond to electrical signals and as well as like chemical signals, and as a result, they will contract. Next is contractility. So contractility is basically the ability for a muscle to contract when it's stimulated, so that's pretty self-explanatory. So when a skeletal muscle contracts, for example, it's gonna like generate tension when it contracts. And so just because a muscle is contracting doesn't mean that it's gonna change size. So like an example is like when you're holding a book out in like your hand, or like I'm holding this mug here. So like my muscles aren't moving, but they're still contracting for me to hold them up. Next is extensibility. So extensibility is basically the ability for the muscle to stretch without being damaged. So an example of that would be like in your stomach, you know how like your stomach can expand to be like 2 times its size to hold a lot of food when you eat a lot. So that's an example of extensibility. And elasticity. So that's kind of similar to extensibility, but you should know the difference, because elasticity is the ability for the muscle to return back to its original length and shape after contraction. So like flexibility and elasticity are sort of related in that they're both about stretching and changing shape, but extensibility is just like it can stretch. It doesn't say anything about whether it can return back to its original length, and then elasticity is just can it go back to how it originally was. Yep. Next are the 3 types of muscle tissue. So I don't know if you guys knew that there were 3 types of muscle tissue, but there are. So we broadly categorize them into 3 types, which are the skeletal muscle tissue, cardiac muscle, and smooth muscle.
Wait, why do you say broadly? Like, are there more?
I mean, basically within these types, we also make them into like smaller categories. But these are like the biggest ways that we can fit them.
Okay.
Yeah. Does the stomach expand so much that it could hold 1/2 gallon of food? Yeah, that's probably true.
Is an example of a smooth muscle?
What?
What is the example of a smooth muscle?
Oh, that'll be on the next slide. I think the stomach could probably expand so much it could hold 1/2 gallon of food. I think your stomach is like the size of your fist, right? I read that somewhere. And so if it's expanding so much, hold a half gallon. Yeah, that would make sense.
No, I thought your heart was the size of your fist.
I think the stomach is the size of your fist too. I don't know. I'll fact check that later. I just know that it's like smaller than you think it would be, but it just expands to be a lot bigger. All right, so these three types of tissue, they share a lot of properties. So they're all muscles, but they basically differ in some things, which I'll be talking about on the next slide. They differ in their location, how they're controlled, and as well as their anatomy, which is like their physical structure. All right. So here are the three types of muscle tissue. It's like a lot of information, but I'll go through it pretty slowly. So let's start with skeletal muscle. And so,
I'm confused on the one that says the 4 properties of muscle tissue, or like, I know the first blank, but all the other blanks I'm kind of confused on.
okay, so are you confused about like what they are, or like, or do you
Yeah.
have them?
Like,
Huh?
what they do, basically.
Oh. Okay, I'll just go over it really quickly because we have a lot to get through, but
No, like for the blanks, I'm kind of confused on the blank. It says I already know like the first blank, but on the second, third, and fourth, I'm really confused.
so these 4. Remember when I was talking about like the 4 things that muscle tissue is like special about? Why it's special?
Oh yeah. Yeah, the 4 properties I got, but then the second blank I'm confused on.
Oh, I'll post a blank in chat.
Yeah, so that's called peristalsis. Peristalsis is the process that's responsible for moving substances through the body. I'll type it if you don't know how to spell it. Okay.
And then is it 85% of body heat is generated by muscles?
All right, so let's start with skeletal tissue. Does anybody know why it's called skeletal muscle? Or do you want to take a guess?
Please go on the previous slide.
I'll post the recording later. Because we have a lot to get through, so I'm sorry, but if we have time at the end, I'll go back to it for you. But I'm not sure if we'll have enough time to get through everything today, so let's try to finish these first. Right, Alex.
It's like attached to your bone, and then you can like move it voluntarily.
Everyone was right. We call it skeletal muscle because they're attached to your skeleton, and they move bones mostly. Not all skeletal muscle tissue is actually connected to bones, so it might be misleading. Because some of your muscle tissue that's like skeletal might also attach to like other muscles or your skin. All right, so the function of the skeletal muscle tissue is pretty easy. It's just like to move different parts of your body. So I think the examples that we talked about earlier, like holding a pencil or like chewing your food, those are all examples of skeletal muscle tissue in action. And just write down for now that skeletal muscle tissue is striated, and I'll talk more about that in the next slide. But that's one of the things that makes skeletal muscle tissue special as well. Skeletal muscle is what we call voluntary, which means that you can control it yourself. So like, you know how you can't control your stomach muscle? So that wouldn't be a skeletal muscle. Any muscle that you can voluntarily contract is an example of a skeletal muscle. Skeletal muscle is also called striated muscle. Yep, you're right. But we try not to refer to it as that like all the time because as you can see here, cardiac muscle is also striated. So sometimes it could be a little bit confusing. Okay, so skeletal muscle is also, do you guys know what a nucleus is? I know some of you guys probably haven't learned parts of the cell yet.
Yeah.
All right.
of a cell?
So if anybody doesn't know what a nucleus is, if you haven't taken like cell bio or like a class that teaches you about cells yet, cells are basically like the smallest units of our body that make up our body, and then within the cell there's a thing called a nucleus, and it basically has, it's like the control center for the cell. It directs all the processes that are happening. And so something special about skeletal muscle that none of the other types of muscles have is that each cell will have over 100 nuclei in it. So what does striated mean again? It just means that it's like, yeah, striped. And the cell shape is less important, but it's still useful if people are going to ask you how to identify the muscle types. So you should probably know that skeletal muscle is shaped like a cylinder. Next up is cardiac muscle. So you guys like know how like, you guys know like cardiac means heart? Like, yeah. So it's found only in your heart. And its function is only related to the heart. So it's responsible for contracting your heart and also propelling blood out of the heart. And the cardiac muscle is involuntary, so you can't control your heart muscles. Your body actually like naturally makes sure that your heart is contracting at like a normal beat, and that's your heartbeat. So it's like a built-in rhythm kind of. Cardiac muscle is striated, so it's striped. Cardiac muscle only has one nucleus per cell, and the cell shape is branched. So I'll show you a picture of cardiac muscle on the next slide so you guys can like visualize it better. But yeah. Finally, we have smooth muscle. So smooth muscle is also involuntary, and we find it in like hollow organs like your intestines, your stomach, and it's also in your glands. I don't know if you guys know what glands are, but glands are like the organs in your body that help release hormones that tell parts of your body to do different things. And finally, we find smooth muscle in blood vessels. So blood vessels will contract to help move blood along or prevent blood from going somewhere. So we also find smooth muscle attached to hair follicles. But that's something that Samvi will talk about later when we talk about the integumentary system. Smooth muscle is not striated, so it's not striped, and that's why we call it smooth muscle. You guys will be able to see the stripes better in the next slide. And the cell shape that really helps you know for sure that it's smooth muscle, it's something called spindle shaped. And so what that is basically the cells are thicker in the middle, and then they'll like taper off to be like thinner. So I don't know like what kind of thing in real life that would be like, but it's just like very thick in the middle, and then it becomes like very thin on the ends. So is everybody good on this table? Does everyone have it written down? This is pretty important.
Can you wait 5 minutes? Like, 2 minutes? Yeah, finish the smooth one.
All right, I'm gonna move on at 10:28. Is anybody confused right now? If you have any questions, you can like PM any of the instructors a question. Oh yeah, Sami, they can look like a football. That is true. Oops, sorry, my bad. Oops. Okay, it's 10:28. So if you haven't finished copying on this table, as always, we'll post the presentation and the key to the handout after class, so you'll be able to see those. All right, so here's a picture of skeletal muscle. Can anybody guess what these like black things are?
Nucleus. Cells. Nucleus.
Yeah, who said nucleus?
Me.
Yeah, so the black things are the nuclei or the nucleuses. So you remember how I said skeletal muscle can have upwards of like 100 nuclei per cell? So each one of these like stripy, okay, so each one of these things, if you can see my mouse moving around, basically one of these rows is a skeletal muscle cell. So we've zoomed in really closely to look at the cells. Do you guys see how there's like alternating light and dark bands here? So those are the striations I was talking about, and that's the best way that you can tell that something that you're looking at is skeletal muscle, even though cardiac muscle is also striated. Skeletal muscle is very special because it looks very like orderly, right? We have the cells like stacked up into like these rows, and then within these cells, we have the striations, like these light and dark bands. All right, so we call muscle cells muscle fibers because they're like elongated. So like fibers, like pretty long things. So each one of these cells is not just like the size of the width of this picture. It'll like go on for like basically the length of an entire muscle. All right. I'm gonna go on to the next picture, which is of cardiac muscle. So I guess you guys can guess what the purple things are. But like we were looking at earlier, these purple things are still nuclei. Oh my god, keep going to the next slide, sorry guys. What was the tissue type? The tissue type on the last slide or on this slide? The last slide was skeletal and this one is cardiac. Okay, so I remember how I said earlier that cardiac muscle, the cells have like this branch type shape. I guess you guys could kind of see it, right? Like you kind of see like how it's not like orderly rows of cells, but instead they kind of branch off to make each cell will kind of like branch off and like maybe you have like two cells after it. So there's no like really like organized order to it. You had to leave and rejoin when we finished the slide out functions. We finished talking about 3 types of muscle tissue, and I can figure out how to send you like a better version of the recording. They can access this on YouTube, so that way you can catch up. But right now we're just going to be talking about what each type of muscle tissue looks like. Yeah, so cardiac muscle also has this special thing, and they're called intercalated discs. And the name sounds pretty complicated, but all it means is like these are the intercalated discs are like you can see it here and like here, like the white things that separate the cardiac muscle cells. It's basically a thickening of the boundary of the cell, and it connects the ends of the fibers together. And so you guys know what cell junctions are? I don't think we learned that in class about like when we're learning about cells, but there are 2 things. They're called desmosomes and gap junctions, and so they're basically they're not intercalated discs, but they're similar because they help the cells like attach to each other and communicate with each other. So if you see here in these pictures, the 2 things that look like walls that are like next to each other, those are basically the plasma membranes of adjacent cells. There aren't intercalated discs on the note sheet, but you should pay attention and maybe write it down because it might still be on the quiz. So just like pay attention and you'll probably get it because it's just about understanding it. So your desmosomes are the connections between cells that hold the two cells together. And so they're strong because they basically anchor cells to each one of another. And then we have our gap junctions, which these things kind of look like Cheerios or like lifesavers, but basically these are channel proteins, and so molecules can flow thanks to these gap junctions. It's kind of like a tunnel in between each cell where little molecules can flow through, also signals. So that's going to be important for when we want to see how cells communicate. I'm going to move on. Finally, we have the last type of muscle, which is smooth muscle. Can you guys see here how there basically are no like stripes? There's no striations. Yeah, so there's no stripes or striations here, which is how you know most clearly that it's smooth muscle. But you can also see here the spindle shape that we were talking about earlier, how the cells are thicker in the middle and then they kind of like taper off to become thinner on the ends like a football. That's also characteristic of smooth muscle. Why is it purple? It's purple because there's like a process that scientists use to stain these cells to make us able to visualize them under a microscope. Because like cells aren't colored, like the individual cells aren't colored in your body, so we need a way to like see individual cells, and the nuclei are purple because there's a special dye, and I don't know it off the top of my head, but if you're interested, this process is called like histology or like histology staining. So we stain the nucleus purple just so we can like know for sure that we're looking at like one cell here. But yeah, it's like a pretty cool thing. And then you can see here how like smooth muscle, we said earlier that like, what do we say? Yeah, like skeletal muscle, I mean smooth muscle, sorry. It's not branched and it's not like, doesn't have like a regular order either. They're kind of just like they're like mishmash, like, you know, stacked on top of each other. All right, so I'm gonna move on because we have like, we have 25 minutes. Okay, let's go. All right, so next we're gonna be talking about muscle anatomy, but specifically this only pertains to skeletal muscle anatomy for the most part. So yeah, so if we take a look, if we move our attention to, that man is muscular. All right, so let's turn our attention to this guy's muscle right here. You guys know what that is? Like what name the muscle is?
Skeletal.
Like, you know how like you have like you're like do you know like the scientific name for this muscle?
Bicep?
Yeah, bicep. So these are your biceps, and so we're going to be zooming in and looking at the structure of one muscle in this slide. And so I'll just get started talking about each definition, and it'll probably make more sense as we go along because things will start to like connect together. So what we're looking at here, this thing, it's a cross section of your bicep muscle. So it's kind of like if you're like cutting a cake and you're looking at like the inside layers of the cake, like that's what this would be. So it's like as if we cut it in half and now we're looking at how it goes that way. So your epimysium, paramysium, and endomysium are basically layers within a muscle that help to separate individual components. So they are all examples of connective tissue. So your epimysium is dense, irregular connective tissue, and it surrounds the entire muscle. So like the whole bicep, your epimysium would surround that whole bicep, and it's made of connective tissue. So it's kind of like, if you want to think about it, like it's like packaging your muscle, your whole muscle together. Next is the perimysium. So that's like the next innermost layer. And what it does is it will surround a bundle of muscle fibers. Do you guys remember? Because I know that terminology can be kind of confusing, but muscle fiber, remember, it's just like a muscle cell. So perimysium will surround about 10 to 100 muscle cells together. And yeah, so what we call that bundle, we call that a fascicle. And an interesting fact is that you guys know, like when you're eating chicken or like pork, when you like eat the meat, it kind of like, well, I guess you guys don't all eat meat, so sorry if this offends you, but if you tear meat, you know how like it rips apart along like stringy things? So when you tear meat, the like the strings that it rips apart along, those are the fascicles. So like each individual string would be a fascicle, and that's surrounded by this connective tissue called perimysium. Why would you though? I mean, you wouldn't do it like for fun, but like, you know, when you're eating it, like okay. All right, so next up is your endomysium. And so endo, you might see it come up again in later science, but endo basically just means like inner. So it's like the most inner layer, and that is the connective tissue that covers each individual muscle cell. And note that, like I was saying, each muscle cell is also called a muscle fiber. It's also called a myocyte. So when we're learning about muscular system, sometimes people will refer to it with different names. So just don't get confused, because each of these three things is referring to the same thing, which is a muscle cell. Is everybody good on that so far? Say something if you're confused.
Yeah, I'm a little confused.
Yeah, okay,
Like,
what's up?
for the like blank, it's kind of also really confusing because it's like asking a question and then there's barely any of the letters, so I don't really know.
Oh, okay, so like I guess like you can like write it in your own words. Like it doesn't have to be like perfect. And there's gonna be a key later too. So just write down what you think it is for now, and you can always check your answers. Like no one is gonna be like grading you on this. So okay, so next up, we've already covered the epimysium, perimysium, and endomysium, and those are basically like the individual like connective tissue layers that separate muscle cells, fascicles, and they wrap the whole muscle. Next up is a tendon. I don't remember if we already talked about tendons last week, but tendons are a flexible type of collagen tissue, and it connects the muscle to the bone. So as you can see here, this white thing is a tendon, and it'll extend from the bicep all the way to your upper arm bone. You guys remember what the upper arm bone is called?
Radius?
Yeah, Alex is right. It's the humerus. So your tendon will extend from your bicep muscle and attach to your humerus. So tendons connect muscle to bone. So do you guys remember what the difference is between a tendon and a ligament now that you've learned what they both are?
But I think ligament.
1 minute. I swear I was only for 1 minute.
I think isn't ligament like bone to muscle or something?
I swear it was only for
No,
1
that's
minute.
tendon. Tendon connects bone to muscle.
Ligaments connect bone to bone, but
Yeah,
tendons connect bone to muscle.
Yeah, so tendons are bone to muscle, ligament is bone to bone. All right, so moving on. Let's do this really quickly because we have a Kahoot today and I want to have time to get it done. So if you guys, what would number 1 be? You can just type it in the chat. You guys think you know what it would be?
Does a ligament connect muscle to bone?
Nope, ligaments connect bone to bone. All right, let's actually start easier. So what would 6 be? Yep. 6, this thing here. You can see the little holes inside of it.
You grab my neck. Jenny! You grab my neck.
All right, so this is bone. Whoever said red bone marrow, that's right. You're just very specific, so I guess you're even more correct. All right, so you guys can label this on your own in the note sheet, but since for the matter of time, I'm just going to go and reveal what they all are. So this one is perimysium, and you know that it's perimysium because this is going to be surrounding those 10 to 100 little muscle fibers. Number 2, this little red thing here, that's a blood vessel. So blood needs to get to your muscles, obviously. So there are blood vessels within your muscles. And so it's red, which means that it's an artery. And I can talk more about that later, but since we don't have time, I'm just gonna move on quickly. 3 is a muscle fiber. See, it's like the smallest individual unit, and that's your muscle cell. 4 is the fascicle. And so that's like the bundle of muscle fibers. 5, endomysium. The arrow is like, you can't really tell whether it's pointing to like the big thing or not. So that's why it's like kind of hard to label these sometimes. But the point of the arrow is basically and pointing to that membrane that is encircling the muscle fiber cell. So that's your endomysium. 6 is bone. 7 is that tendon that's going to be connecting your bone to your muscle. And 8 finally is the epimysium surrounding that whole muscle. And I'm moving on. You guys can see in the presentation later if you need a copy of them. All right, last thing. Hopefully we can get it done in 5 minutes so you guys have time for Kahoot. But this is your neuromuscular junction. And so this is, we're zooming in really, really, really a lot now. So you guys know like nervous system, right? So the nervous system and the muscular system work together for contraction. And so that's why we call it the neuromuscular junction, because this is where the nervous system and the muscular system are directly connecting. And that's how we get that contraction, because it's like your brain sends a signal and then your muscle contracts. So they're working together. So let's start by talking about what this onion looking thing is. So that is the end of a motor neuron. And so your somatic motor neurons are responsible for stimulating contraction. And I'll just show you real quick. I'll go back to the other slide, but a motor neuron will basically come all the way from the inner part of your brain, all the way down your spine, and then interact with a skeletal muscle. So there are like many motor neurons, and they all come from your brain, go down your spine, and go to your muscles. And that's why if you like damage your spine, you can become paralyzed, because the neurons that help connect to your muscles will get severed, and then you can't move them anymore. So that's why spine injuries are so bad. Okay, so the presynaptic terminal is basically where this motor neuron ends. So that's like here. That's the presynaptic terminal. It's kind of like an airport terminal, because like things are leaving. You can think about it like that. And a synapse, there's like the word synaptic. A synapse is basically a region where a neuron and a target cell will have communication. Synaptic cleft is that space here you can see. It's like blue colored. It's the space between this neuron, the end of this neuron here, and this red thing here. That's the start of a muscle cell. So in this space, there's like molecules that are going to be being released, coming back and forth. and they're going to be broken down in here, or they'll also move around in here. Postsynaptic membrane, these like folds here, that's the plasma membrane of your skeletal muscle cell. So I said like we zoomed in a lot now. So this thing is the start of a skeletal muscle cell. And so we'll talk more about contraction tomorrow. So right now I just want you guys to know the vocabulary about how this neuromuscular junction is labeled. And know that what a motor unit is basically, it's not like one neuron goes to one muscle, because then we would like need a lot of neurons and it'd be like not efficient. So one neuron can stimulate a bunch of muscles. Like one neuron might stimulate a bunch of muscles in your arm. And so an easy way that we refer to that is a motor unit. And what it is just one neuron and all the muscles stimulated by that neuron. So it's kind of like a dog walker. Like one dog walker person will have many leashes connecting it to many dogs. And that would be one motor unit. I will post the presentation in Classroom later. Okay, I'm moving on. Sorry if you guys didn't get it, but it'll be posted. Last thing we're going to be talking about today is something called acetylcholine. And this is really, really important in your nervous system and in your muscular system because acetylcholine is something we call a neurotransmitter. You guys know what neurotransmitters are? Basically what it is a small, really small molecule, and I've shown the structure here below if you guys know how chemical structures work. But you should just know that it's a really small molecule and it's produced by your nervous system. And this neurotransmitter basically gets released by the neuron. And it gets released into the synaptic cleft, that gap we were talking about. And these purple things are called acetylcholine receptors. And the acetylcholine are like the little green things. Those are the molecules. They bind to the receptors, and that's what causes contraction. And it's definitely way more complicated than that. So we'll be talking about that tomorrow.
Wait, are they like protein or?
So this acetylcholine molecule here is not a protein. It's just a small molecule. That's the way that we categorize it because it's not protein. It basically doesn't really have a category, so we just call it a small molecule. All right, so that's the end of that. Let's do the Kahoot now. So I'm gonna pause the share and pull up the Kahoot. So everybody go to kahoot.it.
Wait, when's the test again?
When's the what?
The test.
Next Friday.
Oh, okay.
Wait, the test is going to be like all three systems?
Yep, all three systems. Did everybody go to kahoot.it?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm just starting the game, so just give me a second.
What's the game pin?
Just give me a second. Sorry. All right, can everyone see it? 803, 7803.
Why the nickname Spinner?
Oh, what are those nicknames? Are those like automatic?
Yeah, you put like a nickname Spinner.